They opened the cage on purpose. That is the part nobody from outside the coalition ever believes, and I understand why. It sounds like a lie told to make a story bigger. But I was there. I stood in the upper gallery of the Celavan Workolege with my 6 eyes fixed on that hall, and I watched a senior officer key the locks with his own claw. He did it slowly. He wanted us to see him do it. My name carries no weight where you are, so call me what my students called me, instructor. I taught sensory ethics to first-year cadets, which is a soft subject in a hard place. My people are the sail, we are prey. We have been prey for 100,000 years, and our bones still remember it. When something moves too fast near me, my hearts try to leave through my throat. That is not weakness. That is information our ancestors paid for in blood. I tell you this so you understand what I felt that day, and why I could not understand the girl. The Workolege sat on a ring of pale metal that turned forever around a dying star. From the galleries you could see the whole training hall below, a bowl of gray stone the size of a small valley, ringed with seats for 10,000. That morning maybe 800 sat watching, cadets in their cohort colors, instructors like me, pretending we were calm, and up on the high dais the provost. His name was Koruth Vaughn. He was Korati, one of the old Apex peoples, armored like a thing that had never once in its life needed to run. The Korati believed the galaxy had a natural order and that they sat near the top of it. They were not entirely wrong by the old measure. They were strong. They were patient. And they had decided that season that the new species needed a lesson about where they ranked. The new species were the humans. There were 9 of them in the whole Workolege, 9 out of 40,000 cadets. Earth had only joined the coalition a handful of years before, and most of us still did not know what to make of them. They were tall and soft-skinned and strange. They had eyes only on the front of their heads, which meant they could not see what crept behind them, which to a sail is the most frightening thing imaginable. They laughed at odd moments. They touched each other for comfort without shame. They slept too deeply. And they did not flinch the way the rest of us did. I had noticed it early in my own classroom. When I played a recording of a Death World predator's hunting call, the kind of sound designed by evolution to freeze prey in place, my sail students went rigid and my karate students bristled their plates. The human girl just tilted her head and asked what it ate, not whether it would eat her, what it ate, as if she were already 3 steps ahead, deciding how to live in a world that contained such a thing. Her name was Marisol Reyes. The other humans called her Saul, which I later learned meant son in one of their many languages. She was small even for a human, with dark hair she tied back hard and a way of going very still when she was thinking. She was not the strongest cadet in her cohort. She was not the fastest. She finished in the middle of nearly everything. If you had asked me the day before which of the 9 humans would matter to history, I would not have named her. That is the thing about prey instincts. They are very good at noticing teeth. They are very bad at noticing the quiet ones. The trial that morning had a formal name, the trial of standing. Every cohort faced it once. The idea was simple and old. A live Death World animal, drugged and restrained, would be brought into the hall and the cadets would be made to stand near it. Just stand. The point was not to fight. The point was to measure who broke, who fled, who locked up, who held. It was a test of nerve dressed up as tradition, and most cohorts passed it sweating and shaking but intact. What the provost arranged that day was not the trial as it was meant to be run. I knew something was wrong when the handlers brought the crate in. It was too large. The standard trial used small ambush creatures, the size of a sail child, frightening but manageable. This crate was the height of 3 cadets and reinforced with black field bracing, the kind used to ship things that could think their way out of ordinary boxes. The handlers were karate too, and they moved it with the careful, sliding steps of people who did not want to make the thing inside angry. A murmur went through the galleries. Cadets pointed. I leaned forward and felt all 6 of my hearts knock together. "What is that?" said the instructor beside me, a quiet old Velthi named Asun who taught navigation. He had been at the Workolege longer than anyone. "I do not know," I said. "I do," he said, and his voice had gone thin. That is a Gravenstalker from Hollow Reach. He looked at me with his pale, flat eyes. They do not use those in the trial. They have never used those. You cannot drug one safely. The dose that calms it is close enough to the dose that kills it that the handlers gamble every time. Down in the bowl, the provost rose from his seat. The hall went still in that way crowds do when they sense weather coming. His voice carried without effort, amplified by the old stone. "Cadets," he said, "tradition asks you to stand before a danger and prove your bloodline equal to it. Today we honor that tradition fully. Today there will be no half measures." He let that sit. I watched the cohorts below. The humans were seated together at the eastern edge, a small dark cluster among the bright colors of the others. I could see Saul among them. She was not looking at the provost. She was looking at the crate. "It has long been suggested," the provost went on, and now there was something underneath his words, something with an edge, "that certain new members of the coalition are not suited to the harder duties, that they are too soft, too young as a people, that when the galaxy shows its teeth they will run." He turned his great armored head toward the eastern edge, toward the humans. "Today we give them the chance to prove otherwise, or to prove us right." I understood then. This was not a trial. This was a sentence dressed as one. He had brought a creature that should not be in that hall, and he had pointed it at the only 9 people who could not push back, and he had built himself an audience of 800 to watch them fail. I looked at the humans again. 8 of them had gone tense and pale, gripping the rail in front of their seats. Their leader, a broad, older cadet named Okonkwo, had half risen, his jaw set, ready to protest. The injustice of it was plain on all of them. All of them but one. Saul had stood up too, but not to protest. She had climbed down one row, toward the floor of the bowl, and she was watching the crate with that terrible stillness I had seen in my classroom. The look of someone already 3 steps ahead. Already deciding how to live in a world that contained such a thing. The handlers reached the center of the hall and set the crate down. One of them looked up at the provost, waiting. There was a question in the way he held himself, and I knew the question, because every soul in that hall knew it. The provost gave his answer with one claw on the release. The black bracing fell away in sections, clanging against the stone. For one long breath the crate just stood there, open on every side, and nothing moved. Then the thing inside lifted its head, and I learned what real fear was. I have tried many times since to describe the Gravenstalker to people who never saw it, and I always fail, because the horror of it was not in any one part. It was longer than 3 cadets laid end to end. It moved on 6 limbs that folded wrong, in directions joints should not bend, so that it seemed to pour across the floor more than walk. Its hide was the gray of old bruises. It had no eyes that I could find, only a wide blunt head studded with sensory pits, and a mouth that, when it opened, kept opening, the way a wound keeps bleeding. But the worst thing was the sound it made. A low rolling pulse, felt in the chest before it was heard, the exact frequency that 100,000 years of sail evolution had trained me to fear above all others. The hunting call. The thing that says, in a language older than speech, you are food and the food does not get to leave. The hall came apart. I do not say that to be poetic. I mean it broke, the way a herd breaks. Cadets who had faced live fire in their training screamed and climbed over each other to reach the exits. A cohort of Velthi went over their own railing in a tumbling mass. My own sales students, the ones I had taught patience and calm, scattered like grain thrown on the wind, and I do not blame them, because every instinct in my body was telling me to do the same. I had gripped the gallery rail so hard my claws had scored the metal. The handlers ran. That tells you everything. The trained karate handlers, armored and equipped, took one look at the thing fully loose and abandoned their posts. The drug had not held, or there had never been enough of it. The creature was awake and afraid and in pain, because that is what a wild thing is when you steal it from its world and ship it in a box, and a frightened apex predator in a closed hall full of fleeing prey is the single most dangerous arrangement of matter I can imagine. Down on the dais, even the provost had gone still. Not afraid, I think. Karate do not feel fear the way we do, but something in his posture had changed, the calculation of a creature realizing the dice had come up wrong. The Gravenstalker poured forward off its broken crate, and the pulse of its call rolled out again, and the screaming doubled. It moved toward the eastern edge of the bowl, toward the slowest cohort, toward the ones who had no instinct to run because their world had no creature like this in it. Toward the humans. And one of the humans was already on the floor of the bowl, walking toward it. I want you to understand what I felt seeing that. It was not admiration, not then. It was a kind of horror beyond the horror of the beast, because the only creatures I had ever seen walk toward a hunting call were creatures that had lost their minds. Prey that has broken. I thought Saul had broken. I thought the fear had snapped something in her, and she was walking to her death the way a wounded animal sometimes walks into deep water. I was wrong, and being wrong that day rearranged everything I thought I knew about the galaxy. She was not walking like broken prey. She was walking like nothing I had a word for. Slow, even steps. Hands open and away from her body, low, palms turned down. Her shoulders were loose. Her head was slightly lowered, but her eyes never left the creature, and there was no panic in her face at all. There was concentration. The deep, total concentration of someone doing the most important work of their life. Behind her, the human leader Okonkwo had reached the bowl floor too, shouting her name, but two of the other humans were holding him back, and I understood from their faces that they had seen her do something like this before, that they knew something about her, and about their species, that the rest of us did not. The Gravenstalker stopped. It had been pouring forward, and then it stopped, the blunt head swinging toward this small thing that was not running. Every other creature in the hall had given the predator exactly what its instincts wanted, the panic and the flight that say, "Chase me, I am food." Saul gave it none of that. She gave it stillness. She gave it a thing moving slowly and deliberately into its space, unafraid, and the creature had no script for that. I learned later from the humans what she was doing, though she would have struggled to explain it herself because so much of it lived below words. Humans did not evolve away from predators. They evolved alongside them, and then among them, and then, impossibly, with them. On their world they had walked across open ground in small bands toward animals far larger than themselves, and they had not won those encounters with strength or speed, because they had neither. They had won with patience and nerve and the willingness to keep coming. They were persistence hunters. They were the thing that does not stop and does not panic and is still there at the end of the long day. And somewhere in that long, brutal history, they had learned to read a predator's body the way I read my own students' faces, and they had learned the most dangerous lesson any prey could learn. They had learned that a predator's threat is mostly a question, and that if you do not answer it the way prey answers, the predator does not know what you are. Saul stopped a few body lengths from the Gravenstalker. She did not crouch. She did not raise her hands higher. She breathed slow and visible, and she made a sound, low in her chest. Not a word, not the creature's call thrown back at it. Something else, something steady and continuous and almost gentle, a sound a human throat makes that I have no name for and that the translation matrices could not parse. It was the sound, I think now, that her ancestors had made to frightened animals across 10,000 cold nights. The sound that says, "I am not the thing you fear, and you are not the thing I will run from. Let us both, for one breath, simply stand." The creature's call faltered. The pulse that had been rolling through my chest broke its rhythm, stuttered, and for the first time since the crate opened I could hear other things. The whimper of cadets near the exits. My own 3 breaths, ragged. The scrape of the creature's wrong-folding limbs as it shifted its weight, uncertain. That blunt, eyeless head tracking the small, unafraid thing that would not give it what it wanted. And then, into that fragile silence, came the worst possible sound, a cry. Near the eastern wall, half buried under a fallen bench, one of my own students had not made it out. A young sail named Sorrel, barely past his first molt, the gentlest cadet in my care, the kind who apologized to doors he bumped into. He had frozen the way our kind freezes, gone rigid with the deep instinct that says if you do not move the death may not see you, and the falling crowd had knocked a bench across his legs and pinned him. And now, with the creature gone quiet and close, the fear had finally torn loose from him in a single, thin, terrified cry. The Gravenstalker's head snapped toward the sound. I felt my heart stop, because that was the trigger. That was prey doing exactly what prey does, and the predator's whole body coiled toward it, and there was nothing in the galaxy fast enough to cross that distance before the creature did. Nothing except the thing that was already between them. Saw moved. She did not move away from the creature. She moved across it. In the half-breath the Gravenstalker took to coil toward Sorrel, the human crossed into the line between predator and prey and planted herself there, and she dropped her gentle sound entirely and became something else. I had thought her fearless before. Now I saw I had not understood the word. She drew herself up to her full small height, and she threw her arms wide, and she made herself as large as a creature her size could possibly be, and she shouted. Not the soft sound from before. A roar, raw and enormous from such a small chest, a sound that filled the whole gray bowl, and she stamped one foot down hard on the stone and took a step toward the predator, toward it, into the very space it had decided to claim. This is the part that no sail, no Velthai, no karate in that hall could process, and it is the part I have spent the rest of my life trying to. When you threaten a predator, every prey instinct screams that you are signing your death, but a predator is a gambler. It hunts because hunting pays more than it costs. It coils toward the small frightened thing because the small frightened thing is a cheap meal. And here, suddenly, was a creature standing between it and that meal. A creature that would not run, that made itself large, that came forward roaring and stamping and unafraid. A creature that was telling the predator in the only language that crosses every world that this will cost you more than you can afford. The Gravenstalker had been stolen from its home and shipped in a box and woken into a screaming hall full of light and pain. It was not a monster. It was an animal, frightened and far from anything it knew, and like any animal it ran the oldest arithmetic there is, the arithmetic of cost. And the small thing in front of it had just made the cost too high. The creature flinched. I saw it. 800 of us saw it. The apex predator of Hollow Reach, the thing that had emptied a hall of trained soldiers in seconds, pulled its great wrong-folded body back half a length from a single unarmed human who came up to perhaps its shoulder. Its head dipped. The blunt, eyeless face turned aside. The hunting call did not come again. In its place came a low, broken sound, almost plaintive, the sound a thing makes when it has decided it would very much like to be somewhere else. Saul held her ground one more breath. Then slowly she let her arms come down. She softened. She lowered her head a fraction, and she made the gentle, continuous sound again, and she took one step back, away from Sorrel, giving the creature room, showing it the way out, telling it in that language older than any of our species, you do not have to die here and neither do I. The Gravenstalker watched her. Then it gathered itself and poured backward, away from the humans, away from the pinned cadet, retreating across the bowl until its spine met the cold stone of the far wall, where it folded down small as a hunted thing and went still. For a moment nobody in the entire workledge moved. 10,000 seats, 800 souls, not one of us breathed. Then Saul turned her back on the apex predator, which no creature I have ever known would do, and she walked to where Sorrel lay pinned and trembling under the bench, and she knelt down beside my student, and she put one small hand on his shoulder, and the translators caught her words this time because she meant them to be heard. "I've got you," she said. "You're okay, I've got you." And Sorrel, who had been the gentlest and the most frightened cadet in my care, looked up at this strange front-eyed creature who had walked toward the thing that wanted to eat him, and he stopped shaking. It was Okonkwo and the other humans who freed him in the end, lifting the bench while medical handlers crept in along the walls, keeping the creature in their sight the whole time. But the danger had already passed, and everyone in that hall knew exactly when it had passed and exactly who had passed it. The provost said nothing. I watched him through the whole aftermath, this old apex creature on his high dais, and I saw something happen in him that I did not have a name for then and am not certain I do now. He had arranged a lesson about the natural order of the galaxy, about who stood where, about which species would run when the teeth came out, and he had received his lesson in full in front of 800 witnesses, and it was not the one he had built. He had unleashed an apex predator to put the soft new species in their place, and the soft new species had produced something that made his apex predator lie down against a wall and go quiet. In the days after, they tried to make it small. There were reviews and statements. The word incident was used a great deal. The provost was quietly reassigned to a posting far from any cadet, and the trial of standing was reformed so that nothing like that creature would ever enter the hall again. Officially, it was an accident, a mishandled drug dose, a tradition that had grown careless. Officially, no one had opened the cage on purpose. But I had seen him key the locks with his own claw, and I was not the only one. I went to find Saul a few days later. I do not entirely know why. I think I needed to understand. I found her in the gardens on the green tier, sitting with Sorrel, the two of them sharing some human food she was trying to teach him to eat. He looked at her the way I imagine the first tamed creatures on her world must have looked at the first humans who chose, against all sense, not to kill them. I asked her how she had known the creature would back down, whether she had been certain. She thought about it for a while in that still way of hers. Then she shook her head. I wasn't certain, she said. You're never certain, that's not how it works. She picked at the food. My grandmother used to say something. She raised animals, big ones, the kind that could kill you without meaning to. She said the trick isn't being unafraid. There's no such thing as unafraid, not if you're paying attention. The trick is deciding the fear isn't in charge. The fear gets a vote. It doesn't get to drive. I told her that my people had spent 100,000 years learning to let the fear drive, that it had kept us alive. She nodded slow, like she respected that. Yeah, she said, it kept you alive. Then she looked at Sorrel, who was carefully, bravely trying the strange food. But staying alive and being free aren't the same thing. Sometimes you have to walk toward the thing, not because you're not scared, because there's someone behind you who can't. I have thought about that every day since. We had it wrong, all of us. The Korati and the Sail and the old Apex peoples who divided the galaxy into hunters and hunted and placed themselves so confidently near the top. We thought the most dangerous thing in any room was the one with the most teeth. We thought the apex predator was the creature you could not stop. But that day in the gray bowl of the Workalege, the apex predator was not the thing from Hollow Reach. It was the small front-eyed creature who walked toward it with empty hands, the one who could have run and did not, the one who could have killed it and chose instead to show it the door. The most frightening thing in that hall was not a set of teeth. It was a will that would not break, wrapped around a heart that, even then, even there, would not choose cruelty. The Academy unleashed an apex predator to teach us where the humans ranked. And the humans answered the only way they ever have. The girl stood up first. She walked toward the teeth with nothing in her hands but the refusal to let anyone behind her be eaten. And every one of us who watched understood, in the language that is older than every world, exactly what we had been living beside all along. We were not the apex of anything. We had only never met them yet.